Hello, everyone. We will give it just a minute and let people filter in. All right. Well, good morning or afternoon, everyone. We will go ahead and get started. Thank you for attending today's webinar, How Vista Sands Solar won approval, Lessons from Wisconsin's Largest Solar Project, hosted by Strategic Economic Research, Doral, and Quantum Energy. If we've not met yet, my name is Ariel Kaler. I'm the Director of Business Development here at SER. If you have any questions about today's webinar or want to learn more about SER, please feel free to reach out to me. A couple housekeeping items before we get started. One, this session will be recorded and shared with everyone who registered when the recording is ready. Two, we will have a Q&A at the end, so please drop your questions in the Q&A feature and we will do our best to get to all of them. Okay, well, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Jonathan Baker, the lead developer of Vista Sands Solar.
Great, thank you. John Baker, Vice President of Development for Doral Renewables. Doral is a company that's about 6 years old, founded by Nick Cohen, who was an industry veteran, founded his own shop in 2018, 2019 timeframe. Now we're currently at about 70 people, based out of Philadelphia, but with employees throughout the country and are developing nationwide. Our big flagship project that is the first one that was completed is the Mammoth North project, and then we've followed behind that with several other phases of the Mammoth project, totaling about 1,300 megawatts in northern Indiana. And now we are starting to build out some of the projects that were developed behind that, including the Vista Sands project that we hope to begin construction on next year and that we're all here to talk about. Brief development highlights on Doral. Again, currently we're developing nationwide. Our current pipeline is about close to 18 gigawatts, but again, as a relatively young company, only about 1,500 megawatts are either built or under construction, with more coming behind in the future years. So I sit in Chicago, where I lead our majority of our MISO development, including the developer on the Vista Sands project. I have been with several shops prior to Doral, been here about 4 years, but prior to that was at large developers like Ørsted and EDF, and prior to that, some of the wind OEMs like Gamesa and Acciona. All right, we can go to the next slide. And let's just skip right over that. So we'll talk more about the Vista Sands project. A few key facts on it. It's a 1,300 megawatt project up in Portage County, Wisconsin. So it's about an hour and a half north of Madison in the Central Sands region, a large vegetable and potato growing area. We'll go into a lot more detail on some of these items on the next slides, but just giving a general timeline, development actually started with the first lease and interconnect position back in 2021, 2022, early 22 timeframe. Pretty typical development schedule in terms of doing a lot of the land acquisition and environmental work over the 22-23 timeframe. 2024 was pretty important for the project. It's when we submitted for our CPCN, and a lot of the negotiations and discussions that we'll talk about on the future slides were carried out at that time. Early 2025, so just about a year ago, we received our CPCN from the Wisconsin Public Service Commission. And since that time, we've been doing additional engineering and late stage studies like geotech and working to find an EPC. And we are hoping to targeting next spring to begin construction. And so we hope to have the announcements for a firm construction date in the near future. So we can go to the next. Um, so I think one of the things we really want to focus on in the few minutes before I hand it over to the quantum team is talking about our outreach. I know it's pretty cliche at this point to say communicate early and communicate often, but with this particular project, we were adjacent to the Buena Vista Wildlife Area, which is a 15,000 acre conservation area dedicated to preserving and growing the greater prairie chicken population in Wisconsin. So it's the largest concentration of prairie chickens in the state. So that it's a very important area recreationally. A lot of birders, hunting occurs there. It's a very important conservation area. It has a long history of being an area where many conservation-minded people within the state came together to really grow and expand. So when we were starting this project, we assumed that we might be dealing with some of the typical concerns that we may all used to be dealing with, impact to ag land. There are a couple large vegetable processing facilities nearby, so we thought the concerns might be around, will employment be impacted if the stock that is going to feed these canning and processing facilities, you have to go further out for it because several thousand acres locally are going to be converted into farmland. So that was really what we were gearing up for as the potential main concerns. But we, soon discovered that it was really going to be adjacent to this conservation ground that was really the primary concern and would attract the most attention. So I don't know if I would really call it revolutionary, but one thing we really tried to accomplish was to meet early, well before the CPCN. We thought, okay, we could just submit the application, but after some internal discussion, we said, why don't we, a year before we submit the CPCN, why don't we meet with the key stakeholders, Department of Natural Resources, Dane County Conservation League, and really understand what their concerns are. And at the time, there are a lot of pressures on the prairie chicken. It wasn't really expected that solar would be one of them. We weren't using any conservation grounds, and while we would be adjacent, farming has its own impact. So when you talk about reducing all the agricultural inputs, all the traffic associated with harvesting and planting, also just issues that were totally unrelated, like how much vegetation cover is in the area, and can raptors use that to hunt prairie chickens, and is that putting pressure on the population? So there are, a dozen factors that were impacting prairie chickens, and there was no real consensus that solar would exert negative pressure, and in fact, converting from agricultural to more native prairie with panels on top of it would, in our estimation, could be a net benefit. So we did try and engage early prior to the CPCN to really meet with these groups and understand their concerns. We can go to the next slide. So as a result of that, it's not just enough to meet with them. You also want to really hear their concerns and try and make layout adjustments. Now, what was interesting in Wisconsin is that there's actually a pretty strong track record of projects being approved without modification. So there was some idea, okay, could we just say, here's our project layout. We want to move forward with it as is. We don't really want to entertain modifications. But we thought that wasn't really the best approach, and that we should actually look at what we could accommodate and accept in terms of project modifications without really hurting the ability of the project to move forward at the full capacity. So on the right side, you can see some of the agreements we were willing to make essentially as part of those pre-CPCN discussions, and then during the actual CPCN process itself. So a few key things. We did designate the pink area. So the blue area you're seeing on the map is the conservation area. It extends several miles to the south, but these are the areas where our project layout and the conservation grounds interacted. So the light pink areas are the ones we said initially, like we can avoid building here. We'll create somewhat of a buffer. While we don't think there should be a formal setback, we can avoid some of the parcels that are closest to the conservation grounds. We also set back from any known lek locations. Those are not shown on the map because it's confidential information, but we avoided leks, which are essentially the breeding grounds for the prairie chickens. A big concession, we were able to eliminate overhead transmission, except for a very small segment up north near the point of interconnect, which is just off the northern end of the map. So that was a big, we talked to our engineering group. They said, the losses will increase, but we're avoiding building some substations. So overall, the loss of energy is probably going to be offset by lower construction costs, and that becomes a concession we can make that is important to the conservation community, but doesn't have to impact the project negatively. And then a few other things that might be considered typical in terms of establishing the right vegetation mix under the panels to support pollinator and native prairie restoration, accepting some limitations on mowing, modifying the fence design to allow more wildlife friendly fencing, creating some wildlife corridors so that the wildlife could pass through some of the larger contiguous blocks of panels. So it really was a collaborative process where we felt like when our CPCN went in, we had committed to pretty significant concessions and really heard the concerns of the local conservation community. Next slide. Yeah. So this is what the project now looks like today. So we made all those concessions, but then when we were awarded the CPCN, we were immediately appealed by the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation. So it's a specific nonprofit, but they also have a large number of affiliated conservation groups that report up to them and had concerns over the project. So during our CPCN testimony, they were pushing for pretty significant setbacks beyond what we had offered voluntarily in our CPCN. And so after we were awarded, they asked for an additional almost 1,500 acres to be eliminated from the project layout. So then we were also faced with a decision, okay, do we engage further and try and apply a scalpel to some additional concessions we could make? Or do we say, the PSC decisions are mostly upheld, and we should just go through the full appeal process and expect that we would ultimately prevail. There were merits to both cases, but ultimately we decided, we don't want to drag groups over the finish line and have them still writing op-eds and getting upset with our project. We'd rather convert them to project supporters. So we continued some negotiations. And the solution we settled on, we were able to identify some additional parcels immediately adjacent to the conservation area that we could avoid. But then we also went back for a limited reopening. There were some additional grounds that weren't available to us at the time of our CPCN. We went to the PSC and said, look, we think we can offset the loss of this. That we can avoid some ground adjacent to the conservation areas, but if you can allow us to amend our application to add in a few hundred acres, we can keep the project at its original size. And as we go into the quantum portion of the report, that was a very critical part for us because we could articulate how these benefits would be reduced even if it went from a 1,300 megawatt to an 1,100 megawatt project, while that would still be damaging, and you're essentially removing a utility scale project from the resource mix, and we didn't want to accept the loss of those benefits. So we really did, again, try and use a scalpel to say how can we keep the project at its size, but still feel like the conservation community, which wrote over 1,200 comments to the PSC, how can we feel like they've been listened to and had a chance to impact the final layout? And so we talk about project benefits, and I know that Dave will go into more detail on this, but I do like to bring up that I attended the Grant Township, which will host about two-thirds of the project. They went through their 2026 budget. They're talking about going from a 900,000 to a 934,000 township budget. Grant Township will receive about 1.8 million annually from the shared utility revenue payment. That is how acts as the sort of pseudo property tax in Wisconsin. So the fact that its budget will almost triple, they can either stop collecting property taxes from their residents, or they can significantly increase funding for a variety of efforts within the township. It's a very meaningful impact. So again, I get into this for its environmental benefits, but it's nice to see that it's a pretty significant driver for these rural townships that have difficulty coming up with these funds without these projects being available. So I think that is the quick version of the Vista Sands project. And now I know the quantum team is planning on going into some detail on how exactly we quantify these benefits and how we use that during the CPCN process to provide a real intellectually vigorous backstop for why this project would be beneficial to the community.
Thank you so much, John. Really, it's an honor to play any role in the historic success that you led with Vista Sands, and we can't wait to see it come into construction and operation, hopefully on schedule here soon. So, good morning, everybody. I'm Andrew DeMille. I'm COO and co-founder of Quantum Energy Inc. We help to measure the true costs, often the unseen impacts of energy projects, to help some of the largest developers de-risk and get approvals, as well as helping some of the largest energy buyers to make decisions with the greatest impact and capture more ROI with their clean power procurement. So I'm also a proud father of two. I've got a 2.5-year-old daughter and a 7-month-old boy. It brings a lot of purpose to this work that we're doing today. So thank you for having me. Next slide, Ariel. We're also joined by Dr. Daniel Howard. So Daniel is the CEO of Quantum Energy. He's truly an expert in energy system modeling, and particularly for the quantification of what is often referred to as externalities. They exist, but they're difficult to quantify. So public health, ecosystem, economic benefits that are usually just overlooked. Daniel's going to join us for the Q&A. So he led all of the technical development of some of what you're going to see today, as well as expert testimony in support of Doral and Vista Sands. So please keep your questions in mind and feel free to drop them into the Q&A so that we can jump into those at the end. Next slide, please, Ariel. All right, so today we're going to talk about how quantifying impacts, again, the externalities of these projects can overcome opposition and ultimately lead to major approvals. And that was, large part due to John's work and coordinating this effort. But for today, I really want to make this land. What does this mean for you? Next slide, please. So we're going to cover 3 key critical interventions. The first is around proving the unseen benefits by quantifying what traditional analytics miss. Right? We've always known that there's something here, but we couldn't put our finger on it and quantify it. Second, it's about how you can overcome opposition by making arguments that are robust enough to give regulators the justification that they need. And then third, this is about securing maximum community benefits by showing exactly what would be lost if setbacks were approved and reduced project size. This is a very common and incredibly costly compromise that we're seeing frequently today. So let's go ahead and jump in. Next slide. So first, well, let's start with the evidence gap, so to speak. Next slide. So as I mentioned, total view is a platform that has been developed, led by Dr. Daniel Howard, funded by the National Science Foundation. And it's here to quantify what we couldn't previously quantify in an accessible, replicable way. So let me jump into how this works at a high level. The first is simulating the grid with and without the project in question, Vista Sands, to understand how it changes the grid generation on an hourly basis, largely displacing coal and natural gas, which we'll get into shortly. And then the next step is, well, if you displace other generation types like coal and natural gas, what does that mean in terms of changes or reductions in pollution to our air, our soil, and our water? And then the third key step is tracing those changes in pollution down what's known as epidemiological or ecosystem pathways to ultimately get to public health, ecosystem, and economic benefits or impacts. And so we use industry standard methodology to get from A to B to C. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about what that looks like for Vista Sands and how it might be of help for you too. Next slide, please. So what's important here is that Total View accounts for a complete picture, including the mining of raw materials, the manufacturing of, say, the panels, the construction, the operation of end of life. So this is a net benefits analysis that includes all of those impacts across the life cycle of a given project. Next slide. So to understand what these unseen benefits might be, we had to use Total View to simulate as if Vista Sands existed in Portage County, Wisconsin, in the MISO Balancing Authority. So there's a whole lot of depth that goes into all of this, but for all intents and purposes, we model the entire grid system with and without that project in question. That was the step one in the previous slide. And let's go ahead and move into what we found in terms of the expectation of Vista Sands impact on the grid and how things change. The first key takeaway here is that the Vista Sands Solar, that's the blue bar here on the top, is expected to displace 950 gigawatt hours of coal, 1,200 gigawatt hours of natural gas. So what does that mean? Why does that matter? Well, this sets the foundation for everything that's to come. Next slide. So this is where the quantification helped to move this project towards regulatory justification in a very contentious environment. Next slide, please. 2,485 disability adjusted life years. So this is the WHO standard metric for measuring morbidity and mortality, relative risk of disease and or premature death. Okay. This project in year one, to make this a little bit more concrete, this is like 500 people that you know and love getting an extra 5 years of healthy life with their families. It's fewer hospitalizations, less asthma, less cancer, healthier quality of life, right? And before we move on to the next slide, I think it's really important to point out that this kind of information, it doesn't convince hardline opposition to say, oh, well, now that I've seen this, I'm totally on board with you. I think there's a percentage of folks that just aren't going to get on board, and that's what it is. But when it comes to regulators, this gives them a better understanding of the trade-offs. It gives them, some call it political cover, to make a good decision, whatever that might be. And for the silent supporters, this gives them talking points to bring to their neighbors. Hey, you know what? This actually improved meaningfully and quantifiably improves health. Have you thought about that? And then the movable middle, right? So folks that are maybe the swing vote, so to speak, this gives them something that is local benefits that they can get behind and defend as these projects move through their process. Next slide, please. 5.3 potentially disappeared fractions of species, PDFs. So don't get worried about what that is. It's an industry standard metric to understand how changes in pollution pressures impact species. So over 5 at-risk species, including the prairie chicken, which was at the center of a lot of this opposition, would be safe if Vista Sands happens. Another way to think about that is the flip of that. Well, if it doesn't happen, we're going to lose these species or this pressure will continue. So from avoided carbon pollution, reduced acidification, different levels of photochemical oxidants, et cetera, are all going to be reduced. I think it's also important to point out that that bottom left bar, the land transformation, land use, that's the upper bound of land impacts. Okay. So keep that in mind as we go forward to the next slide, because it helps to bring everything into context when we look at the relative impacts of these. $630 million in economic benefits expected in year one. So this is a financial valuation of the public health and ecosystem benefits, the years of life and the species saved that we just discussed. This is using EPA valuation frameworks. And this is translating, years of life and species saved, also resources avoided, for example, avoided fossil fuel energy resources into dollars, into terms that we can all relate to, right? So these are all, to repeat, these are separate, complementary, and 100% additional to the direct, indirect, and induced economic benefits that Dave and SER, our leaders at quantifying and bringing to the table, which you'll see more shortly. And then before we move on, that land use piece down there in the bottom left corner, is it real? Yes. Is Doral doing their best to mitigate the land use? Yeah, you heard from John himself. So much to mitigate that, but that's the upper bound of negative impact. And look how it stacks up against the positive benefits. This is how we can change the game for these projects to understand what's really at stake. Next slide, please. So the next phase was around a threat of reduction in project size, of setbacks that could reduce the project by 365 megawatts is what we analyzed. Can you move to the next slide, please? So through some of this opposition and course of action, the PSC was considering reducing the project from 1,315 megawatts to 950, losing out on 365 megawatts. So for all the developers here, clearly that's, hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe $500 million in revenue over the life of this project. But that's not really what was the point here. What would be the cost to the community? What would be the cost to public health if the project was reduced and these setbacks were approved? So this is where this comparative analysis came in. The light blue bar, that little difference there, that's the difference between the full project size and the reduced project size if setbacks were approved. So let's move on to the next slide. Essentially, you're going to lose out on displacing some coal and natural gas. What's that worth? Right? 631 years of additional life would be lost if setbacks were approved. We didn't frame it quite like that. We framed it more like a loss in benefits, which is also true. But this took this from an abstract argument of, we want to preserve the full project size. Of course you do. Of course. To what does this actually mean to the community and public health? So this takes it to more of a precise understanding of what are the trade-offs here. They became impossible to ignore. Next slide, please. An additional 1.3 species at risk could be saved. So now we went from the contentious nature of the project of the prairie chickens habitat and how this could impact them, which we absolutely need to and have addressed, to realizing that the environmental impact of not preserving the full project size would actually worsen with the smaller project. So it really changes the game to help bring this all into context, going beyond the site-specific impacts to a broader quantified understanding about what's at stake for the grid scale, and that is Portage County, Wisconsin, and beyond. Next slide, please. The reduced project size would have lost $136 million in the first year, right? So this brought the evidence of why this project should be retained at full scale, not because Doral, the developer, wanted to maintain the full capacity. Of course they do. That's the job. But this helps to show why it matters for the community and hopefully both sides of the aisle. Next slide, please. So taking a step back, since Quantum had this incredible honor to be part of Vista Sands' success story, in August of 2025, the World Economic Forum Responsible Renewables Infrastructure Initiative recognized Vista Sands as one of 21 global replicable case studies. Now, I don't think this is because of the big size or even the controversy or opposition, because the opposition, that's commonplace. It was because there's a replicable methodology and approach that for the first time is accessible to the industry. So to be clear, since Vista Sands, it used to take, but prior to that, we've been developing this for years now. It used to take teams of scientists, millions of dollars, terabytes of data, months or maybe even years of analysis to get this kind of data. And now it's available, and we've automated it since working with Doral and have priced it to fit any project, to de-risk pipelines, and to help get more projects, more steel in the ground faster while maximizing and preserving health and benefits for all. So for the developers in the audience, this is going to help prove to communities that you're not just taking out prime ag land. What's in it for you? Answering that question. For regulators, justifying controversial approvals even when there's organized opposition. And then to round this out, we're quantifying what we've always known to be true, right? But we've never been able to measure it. It becomes clear that these co-benefits really outweigh the impacts. It's time that we bring the same rigor that we do to financial modeling, to impact modeling. And to round this out at the very end here, what was the most contentious project and the largest in Wisconsin is now a global model for you to take advantage of. I think it's time that we stop saying it's better for climate, better for health, better for the economy. I mean, the question is not, do these benefits exist? They do, to varying extent. The question now is, are you going to quantify these impacts before your opposition defines the narrative for you? So with that, we're here for Q&A. Dr. Howard is in the Q&A, who provided the expert testimony and everything that you've seen here today. I'm just so grateful to be here, and I want to pass it over to Dave. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate your involvement and excellent analysis. It was great to see the analysis done in that great a detail and done so rigorously. My name is David Loomis, and I'm president of Strategic Economic Research. I was a professor of economics at Illinois State University for 26 years before retiring in order to really get more involved in our company, Strategic Economic Research. While I was at the university, I was co-founder of the Center for Renewable Energy and helped create our undergraduate renewable energy major. And it's exciting to me to see many, or some of our graduates anyway, involved in the industry. And I get to see them at various meetings, hearings, and so forth. Next slide. So we did a report for the Vista Sands Solar Project. You can see the cover on the right-hand side. We were looking to quantify both the property tax, or in this case, shared utility aid formula that would go to the counties and the townships, but also to look at land use. As Jonathan mentioned, the land use was an important consideration in this project because of the number of acres and because of the supply chain impacts that would cause on others for the crops that are grown on this land. So this was one of the largest projects that at the time we had analyzed at 1,300 megawatts plus a 300 megawatt BESS. And so, as you might expect, the economic benefits were quite large. And so we quantify those in two aspects. First is the economic impacts, really, in the form of jobs, earnings, and output. And then the second one is I put the quotes around property taxes because in Wisconsin, they have a shared revenue utility aid formula that I'll mention in more detail in just a bit. But the CPCN, as Jonathan said, was filed with the Wisconsin Public Service Commission, and I'll talk a little bit about that permitting process and how it compares to other projects. But it was already mentioned there was considerable opposition to the project, but not insurmountable opposition. Next slide. So in Wisconsin, renewable energy projects, whether they be wind or solar, are exempt from general property taxes. And instead, there's a megawatt-based tax payment that's collected through the state and then distributed to both the county and townships. And there's initial payment of $2,000 per megawatt, with two-thirds of that going to the local county and one-third going to the local municipality, the townships or town. And then there's an additional incentive payment that just last year increased from $1,000 for each jurisdiction to $1,500 per megawatt to each jurisdiction. So a new total of $3,000 per megawatt. So you can see with the size of Vista Sands that these are considerable, very large payments. And we really can't overstate the impact that this is going to have to those communities. I think it was very meaningful, as Jonathan shared the budgets for these towns. In many cases, if you're doing whether it be Wisconsin or elsewhere, uh, wind and solar projects end up being well into the top 10 taxpayers in a county that come. And so oftentimes quantifying those uh, revenues to the county and to the townships, not to mention other taxing jurisdictions, are just as meaningful, if not more meaningful, than the jobs, earnings, and output that sometimes get a little bit less tangible to decision makers. But conveniently enough, the counties in in some cases, townships are the ones that are deciding on a project. Now, this project went before the state commission, so it's a little bit different, but still, those county and townships decision makers really see the impact of these property taxes. Next slide. So we calculated that it's $6,552,000 annually, with a split there going between Portage County and then what's going to the municipalities. But one of the quirky things in Wisconsin is that the shared revenue formula for the utility aids do not include school districts. So school districts get ordinary property taxes, but they're not one of the beneficiaries of the shared revenue utility aid payments. And so that leaves them potentially losing out on property taxes as this large number of acres transfers from agriculture, ordinary property taxes into this utility aid formula. In understanding of that, Durrell offered a pledge agreement by which Durrell would essentially make the school districts whole by providing approximately $200 per megawatt annually to the school districts where the project is sited, so proportional to the land that's taken out of production and the property taxes that they otherwise would have received from that land. Next slide. So I've been involved in quite a few projects in Wisconsin before the Wisconsin Public Service Commission. I've testified for 15 different solar projects, one recent wind project in Wisconsin with 8 different developers. And the process in Wisconsin is a very formal process, like most Public Utility Commission processes. They typically the opposition is led by attorneys that make an appearance before the commission. It's very regimented in terms of filing direct and rebuttal testimony if that's needed. And in my experience, it's always been Judge Newmark who has been the judge that has administrative law judge that is overseeing this process. And I think he's very fair, but he does allow members of the public to represent themselves at hearings, which is a bit unusual. Typically, Public Service Commission proceedings have attorneys representing opposition, but number of opponents represented themselves at hearings, and I feel like he really gives them the opportunity to put their best foot forward and tries to train them on how to ask a legally correct question without leading the witness or making a statement and things like that. The hearings are usually held over Zoom, so they're virtual hearings. The exception to that was the One Wind project was in person in Madison, Wisconsin. And so this provides an opportunity to get much, I think, more sophisticated analysis. The commission staff is reviewing all of this information, and so that's very helpful to putting forward your best case and technically difficult analyses to be examined and entered into evidence. Next slide. So we want to turn it over to the panel for Q&A. So sorry, before we do that, I turn it back to John to wrap things up and kind of tell us the rest of the story in what happened to Vista Sands now.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we can get into questions pretty quickly, but I think just to summarize what Dave and Andrew were able to communicate is that I mean it was a lengthy process. I think overall there was a genuine desire to find all the ways we could articulate the benefits, and again knowing that the PSC does favor renewables, but does need a way to justify a project like this, because even though most of the projects or all the projects had been approved at the PSC, there was some concern that this one might be so large, 3-4 times larger than the other projects, that it might fall into a different category, face more scrutiny, be subject to much higher setbacks, or the PSC would feel like they needed to really regulate it more firmly than they had on other projects. And especially given that I think, again, over 1,200 comments received, it became almost a national cause for some of these organizations that have affiliates in other states. So there was a genuine concern. In hindsight, it says, okay, we did the right thing. We know they want to support renewables in Wisconsin, but is this going to push the boundary of what was acceptable? And would the PSC feel political pressure to regulate it more meaningfully? And thankfully, with the work of SER and quantum, we were able to put forth an argument that there was really no reason to. And if you look at the PSC's written decision, and just how complementary they are to Doral and the engagement that happened on this project, it's a great outcome.
Great. Thank you, John, for wrapping that up and putting it all together. We have several questions in the Q&A section. A lot of them are for quantum, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. The first one is it truly displacement of coal and gas if the demand is growing and this is just an energy addition, or did a coal plant close actually thanks to the project?
Great question. And hi everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. And Dave and John and Ariel, thanks again so much for having us. We love working with you all, and also it's been quite effective. Our analyses pair well together, and not just with Vista Sands success, but that one wind project that we worked on together recently. It was the first wind project in 14 years approved in Wisconsin, and so it's been great to see those results. On the question of, is it truly displacing coal and gas? Have coal power plants closed? The way that most electricity grids in the United States work is that there's a balancing authority, and that balancing authority has hourly electricity dispatch protocols. And they're typically based on marginal cost, which means that the least expensive options are chosen first in terms of the generation mix, and the most expensive options are turned down first. And so, what our platform simulates is on an hourly basis, based on this additional electricity that's being produced by the project in question, how is that changing electricity dynamics hourly? And the reality is not just natural gas, but also coal are cycled on an hourly basis um, based on these grid dynamics. And we have some actually really interesting graphs that didn't make it into this presentation showing that. And so what we look at is based on the electricity generation produced in this case by Vista Sands each hour, based on all of the grid dynamics and electricity dispatch protocols and prices and technical constraints and ramp rates of different power plants. Ramp rates are how quickly can they be turned up or turned down. Which sources are going to be the ones that are turned down first? And in this case, based on the electricity that Vista Sands was producing, 94% of that electricity was offsetting either natural gas or coal. So while a coal power plant did not necessarily shut down immediately, or would not necessarily be shut down immediately when Vista Sands goes online, its generation on an hourly basis is going to be turned down because cheaper and, in this case, cleaner electricity forms are available.
Great. Thank you. The next question is just asking for a little bit more clarification on how we calculate, or how you calculate health impacts. It seems a little bit less, their comment is, it seems a little bit less straightforward than other impacts to show causation instead of correlation. So that was the first part of the question. And the second part is, do you usually get pushback from people questioning the multi-step causality?
For the health impacts question, does everyone have an extra 2 hours to go over that?
Multiple ways.
The quick-ish answer is there are industry standard life cycle impact assessment methodologies, um, you know, for electricity production. And the way that they work is they look at how a change in emissions, right, which our platform, NSF funded and validated methodology quantifies on an hourly basis. So how those changes in emissions change air quality, and how changes in air quality concentrations, when overlaid with demographic data, lead to changes in human exposure, right? We know people's, breath rate and volume And then based off changes in air quality, we can determine changes in exposure. And then epidemiological exposure response functions are used to determine how changes in human exposure change disease incidence rates. So things like asthma, lung cancer, COPD, cerebrovascular disease, and ischemic heart disease, which is one of the largest killers in the US. And then changes in disease incidence and premature mortality, we then apply standard EPA mortality risk valuation, but it's essentially a financial valuation of increases in hospital admissions based on the cost of these different illnesses, lost wages due to illness, so people who can't go to work because they have, some sort of disease, um, economic impacts of premature mortality, and as well as the economic impacts of these improved environmental services when pollution is reduced.
Yeah, great explanation. Thank you.
And then you asked about pushback.
Yeah, pushback. That was the second part.
Yeah, I mean, Andy, you're on the phone more than me, so you could probably talk to how often we get pushback. I'd say we get it all the time. But after we show the methodology, we have a comprehensive white paper. I don't think it's ever then been an issue. I think we've overcame it every time.
100%. And maybe the question underneath that is more like, well, does everybody believe this? And the answer is no, right? You can't convince everybody with data. I think that the art behind and the messenger of the data is critically important. And so that's where we invite you all in to say, if you have this type of information, what story would you tell with it to influence whom and why? I think that's probably at least as important as going down to the methodology is sound, right? So that's not the point, but the point is, who do you need to influence and why? And what's the story that you can tell with this data that you couldn't previously is where we found this to be most successful. That's my short take.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Of
The
course.
next question is for quantum energy as well. It says, do you measure the flip side of water depletion slash usage? For example, instead of stating the reduced water depletion from renewables, how much more water would be used by coal power generation to make up the reduced project size? It's a good question.
Yeah, great question. So all of our analysis is done on an hourly basis across the entire system. And so, coal and natural gas power plants use a tremendous amount of water for cooling. So as less expensive generation becomes available, i.e. in this case, solar from Vista Sands, and there is less natural gas and coal generation needed, on an hourly basis, we quantify the reductions in water use on an hourly basis across the entire system. We also do life cycle analysis, and I shouldn't say we also, but this is part of life cycle analysis. So we look at the entire life cycle of the project. So not only does the reduction in generation of the coal and natural gas power plants save water, but then less fuel, less natural gas needs to be fracked, less coal needs to be mined, which also uses a lot of water. We quantify those reductions in water use as well as the land use impacts. So the land that is saved from reduced fracking and coal mining. So it's a comprehensive system-wide life cycle assessment.
And one other quick thought, I think one of the questions mentioned something about, well, if energy demand is growing, is this actually going to displace coal and natural gas as you have in this study? And well, nobody knows the future, right? This is a predictive analysis. But I think the important piece to think about is, well, how are we going to meet that demand? Are we going to meet it with a new coal plant? Are we going to meet it with new natural gas? And what are the implications, say, in this case, Vista Sands versus those alternatives? Right? And so that's, I think, a really important way to think about the trade-offs between different generation types to meet growing demand. That's key.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the question, sorry, I missed this of increasing demand. The reality is that as demand is increasing, it's increasing quickly, and at least it is now. It wasn't increasing for a while. Um, if if Vista Sands Solar was not there producing electricity, that demand would still need to be met by load following power plants, or by increasing base load generation. And so that demand, they would still attempt, if possible, to meet that demand based on existing resources. And so in this case, the existing resources, coal, natural gas, which are not run at 100% capacity factor, would be increased to meet that demand. So either way, whether electricity demand is increasing or not, the analysis still holds true in terms of the impacts that the Vista Sands project is going to have. Now, the caveat is we just looked at year one. Each year, the grid mix is a little bit different. The demand is a little bit different. So the impacts will be a little bit different. And that could actually, if the grid changes a lot over time, the impacts could change a lot over time as well, which is why we stick to a year one, super credible, high resolution estimate. And then, when authorities or people ask for lifetime estimates, we do a simple extrapolation, an order of magnitude estimate with a big asterisk saying the grid will change, and as the grid changes, so will these impacts.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that, Daniel. Okay, the next question is for John and Quantum Team. Can you discuss how well the Quantum Energy Report has been or would be received by a local level permitting entity versus today's example, which was a PSC decision?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one I've thought about myself. It's hard to answer because, yes, the local concerns may be a lot different than what the PSC is focused on. Um, but I think the shortest way I can answer is that if you are ultimately successful, do you care that much what individual pieces of evidence or arguments were ultimately successful? So while I think it's always hard to extrapolate out in specific use cases, and especially when it comes to a state level where you might think the analysis is going to be more dispassionate versus a local, very hyper local process where the a lot more emotion might be involved and there might be much more local concerns. But I still think it can give you a lot more confidence to stand up even at that local level and say, hey, we're getting pegged as potentially leaching toxins into the soil or taking farm ground out of production, and these are all going to be negative things for the community. But if you can say, no, your health is impacted in a material way at a very local level, and we've quantified that, then I still think it has value and is an important piece of the conversation.
Yeah, anything to add, Quantum?
Sure. One of the most contentious outputs that's in our comprehensive approach is avoided carbon emissions. Some local situations don't think that's important or think that's anything to care about. We also have what we consider our local lens, which excludes global pollutants and keeps it hyper local focused on what are the local air pollutants that would be avoided and how that's going to make the air that you breathe healthier. It's going to help improve the wildlife situation. You like to hunt or fish, it's going to improve the local stream, right? These types of messages. And again, it's how do you take this data to tell the right story to the right audience to accomplish what? And so that's what I got to share on that.
Yeah. Well, we are almost at time, so I just wanted to give our panelists an opportunity to share anything else that you think is important from this presentation or responses to the Q&A before I wrap us up.
I don't have anything to add. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and appreciate having the opportunity to talk about the Vista Sands project.
Tremendous honor to be here and play any role in your success in Doral's Vista Sands. It's been tremendous, and we hope that this is just the beginning of meeting the moment and navigating these headwinds and getting more projects built and preserving the health and vitality of our economy and the future for our children.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank SER for their
Yes.
leadership in this space and helping so many projects overcome opposition and get permitted. And I also want to thank all of the developers, the buyers, everyone who's on this call who is moving the clean energy, revolution forward despite massive headwinds. Thank you for the work that you're doing. It makes a huge impact in millions of people's lives and will continue to for years and decades to come.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much to our panelists for being here today and sharing your expertise. Thank you to all of our attendees for attending. As a reminder, we will share the recording of this webinar once it's available via email. SER will host our next webinar on January 15th, and we will discuss how the new BESS legislation can accelerate U.S. clean energy development. So hopefully we will see you all there and happy holidays. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.